Thursday nights had become a ritual I'd grown to despise. Margot would kiss my cheek, grab her purse, and announce she was heading to book club with the girls. "Don't wait up, honey," she'd say, her voice carrying that particular brightness that felt rehearsed. "You know how we get when we start discussing literature." Literature. Right. She'd return around midnight, sometimes later, with bourbon on her breath and stories about heated debates over character development. The thing is, I'd been married to Margot Grady for 8 years, and I knew her tells better than she knew them herself. When she lied, she touched her earring. When she was nervous, she cleared her throat twice. When she came home from these Thursday adventures, she did both. Tonight was no different. I sat in my workshop, pretending to sand a cabinet door while listening for her car in the driveway. The basement workshop was my sanctuary, walls lined with hand tools, half-finished furniture projects, and the smell of sawdust that reminded me of simpler times when I actually believed my wife when she spoke. The garage door rumbled open at 12:47 a.m. I'd stopped looking at the clock weeks ago, but my internal timer had become disturbingly accurate. Margot's heels clicked across the concrete floor above, followed by the familiar routine. Keys dropped on the kitchen counter, refrigerator door opening, the soft pop of a wine bottle cork. She was having a nightcap. After book club. After whatever bourbon she'd consumed during her literary discussions. I climbed the stairs, wiping sawdust from my hands with an old rag. Margot stood at the kitchen island, glass of white wine in hand, scrolling through her phone with the satisfied expression of someone who'd had a particularly good evening. "How was book club?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She looked up, startled, then smiled that bright, practiced smile. "Oh, Cal, you scared me. It was wonderful. We're reading this amazing novel about—" She paused, touching her earring. "About a woman who discovers her husband's been hiding secrets." The irony wasn't lost on me. "Sounds fascinating. What's it called?" The Thursday Wife," she said, clearing her throat twice. "By Margaret Atwood." Margaret Atwood didn't write a book called The Thursday Wife. I knew because I'd actually read Margaret Atwood, unlike my wife, who considered People magazine challenging literature. "Interesting title," I said. "Mind if I borrow it when you're done?" "Oh, it's Lisa's copy. She's very particular about her books." Another earring touch. Another throat clear. Lisa. Margot's supposed best friend, who I'd seen at the grocery store last Thursday at 9 p.m., buying frozen dinners for one and complaining to the cashier about having nothing to do on a weeknight. I watched Margot finish her wine, kiss my cheek with lips that tasted like lies, and head upstairs to shower. Always a shower after book club, to wash off the literary discussions, presumably. The next morning, I made coffee and waited for Margot to leave for work. She managed the human resources department at a mid-sized tech company downtown, a job that suited her talent for managing people and situations to her advantage. She was good at reading people, understanding their motivations, finding their pressure points. It made her excellent at her job and apparently excellent at deception. After her car disappeared down our tree-lined street, I began my own investigation. I wasn't proud of it, but 8 years of marriage had taught me that sometimes you have to verify what you hope isn't true. Margot kept receipts, not because she was organized, but because she was paranoid about the IRS. She stuffed them into a shoebox in her closet, planning to sort them quarterly and never quite getting around to it. I dumped the box onto our bed and started sorting through 3 months of her spending habits. The pattern emerged quickly. Every Thursday, like clockwork, parking garage downtown, $12, the Lantern Bar, $47-63 in charges. Sometimes a second charge at the Lantern, always smaller, always around 11 p.m. Then nothing until she got home and opened that wine bottle. The Lantern wasn't anywhere near Lisa's house. It wasn't near the library, the bookstore, or any other place you might expect a book club to meet. The Lantern was a dive bar in the warehouse district, the kind of place where middle-aged people went to pretend they were still young and single. I sat on our bed, surrounded by evidence of my wife's Thursday nights, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not surprise, exactly. I'd suspected for weeks, but having proof made it real in a way that hurt more than I'd expected. My phone buzzed with a text from Margot. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." It was Tuesday. I spent the rest of the day in my workshop, attacking a piece of oak with more force than necessary. By evening, I'd made a decision. If Margot wanted to play games, I could play games too, but I was going to play to win. The next morning, I made a phone call. "Frost Investigations, Gareth speaking." "I need to hire a private investigator," I said. "What kind of situation are we dealing with?" "The kind where my wife thinks book club meets at a bar, and I need proof of what she's really reading." Gareth Frost had come recommended by a guy at the hardware store whose own marriage had imploded under similar circumstances. Ex-state trooper ran a small investigation business out of an office above a coffee shop downtown. Specialized in what he called domestic clarification. "Marital infidelity cases are tricky," Gareth said when I met him that afternoon. He was a big man with gray hair and tired eyes, the kind of guy who'd seen enough of humanity's worst impulses to be permanently unimpressed. "Lot of ways they can go sideways. What exactly are you looking for?" "Proof," I said. "One way or the other. If she's cheating, I want documentation. If she's not—" I paused. "Well then, I owe her an apology and probably some therapy." "Fair enough. I can do standard surveillance, but that's time-consuming and expensive. Photos through windows, following her around town, that sort of thing. Takes weeks, costs thousands, and half the time you end up with blurry pictures that don't prove much." "What's the alternative?" Gareth leaned back in his chair. "Honeypot operation. I go to this bar where she's been spending her Thursday nights. I'm just another guy having a drink. If she's there looking for company, she'll find it. If she's really meeting friends for innocent conversation, nothing happens. Either way, you get your answer in one night. And if she takes the bait? Everything gets documented. Audio, video, where legally permissible, time-stamped evidence of whatever transpires. No ambiguity, no wondering, no he said, she said. Just facts." I thought about Margot's practiced smile, her rehearsed stories, the way she touched her earring when she lied. "How much?" "2,000, plus expenses. Half up front, half when I deliver the report." It was a lot of money. It was also less than I'd spent on Margot's birthday present last year, a weekend in Boston she'd claimed to love but spent mostly on her phone, texting people she said were work colleagues. "When can you start?" "This Thursday. If she's as predictable as you say, it shouldn't take long." I wrote the check, shook his hand, and spent the rest of the week in a strange state of suspended animation. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that I was a paranoid husband about to waste $2,000 proving my wife was exactly who she claimed to be. The other part, the part that had been cataloging lies and inconsistencies for months, knew better. Thursday arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of October day that made our house feel smaller and darker than usual. Margot seemed unusually cheerful at breakfast, humming while she made coffee and chatting about weekend plans. "Book club tonight," she announced, as if I might have forgotten. "We're starting something new. A thriller, I think. Very psychological." "Sounds perfect for you," I said. She kissed my cheek and headed off to work, leaving me alone with my coffee and the weight of what was about to happen. At 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Gareth. "In position, equipment tested, waiting." At 6 p.m. She just walked in, alone, took a table near the bar. At 6:15, ordered a martini, checking her phone frequently, definitely waiting for someone. At 6:30, making eye contact, she's interested. At 7:45, conversation started, audio is clear, she's not mentioning any book club. At 9:20, suggesting we continue this somewhere more private, she knows a place. At 9:47, heading to the Riverside Hotel, she has a key card. The messages stopped. I sat in my workshop, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and the sound of rain on the basement windows, and waited for my marriage to officially end. My phone rang at 11:30. "It's done," Garrus said. "I'll have a full report ready by tomorrow morning. Cal, I'm sorry. This one was pretty clear-cut." "How clear-cut?" "She's done this before. Multiple times. The hotel clerk recognized her. She's got some kind of arrangement." I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the rain and thinking about 8 years of marriage, of trust given and betrayed, of Thursday nights and lies told with a smile. At 12:52 a.m., Margot's car pulled into the garage. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me appreciate living in Maine. Today, it just felt cold. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling while Margot breathed peacefully beside me, occasionally murmuring in her sleep about things I probably didn't want to understand. She woke up cheerful, stretching like a cat and smiling at me, with what I now recognized as post-betrayal satisfaction. "Good morning, handsome," she said, running her fingers through my hair. "You were asleep when I got home. Book club ran really late." "Must have been a good book," I said. "Oh, it was. Very, stimulating." She kissed my forehead and headed for the shower, humming that same tune from yesterday morning. I made coffee and waited for her to leave for work, my phone heavy in my pocket with Garrus's promised report. At 8:15, Margot grabbed her purse and keys, kissed my cheek, and headed out the door with the casual confidence of someone who believed her secrets were safe. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Report ready. Can you meet at my office?" The drive downtown took 20 minutes through streets lined with maple trees showing their October colors. Under different circumstances, it would have been beautiful. Today, it felt like driving to my own funeral. Garrus's office sat above Grind Coffee, accessible through a narrow staircase that smelled like espresso and disappointment. He was waiting with a manila folder thick enough to choke on and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Coffee?" he offered. "Just the report." He slid the folder across his desk. "I'll walk you through it, but fair warning, it's comprehensive. Audio transcripts, time-stamped photos, background information I gathered during the evening. Your wife is experienced at this." I opened the folder to the first page. A photo of Margot sitting at the lantern, checking her phone. She looked beautiful, confident, and completely comfortable in a setting she'd never mentioned to me in 8 years of marriage. She arrived at 6:08, Garrus said, consulting his notes. Ordered a dirty martini, extra olives, took a table with clear sightlines to the entrance, classic positioning for someone expecting company but wanting to see who else comes and goes. The next photo showed her making eye contact with someone off camera, Garrus, presumably. Her smile was different from the one she gave me, more predatory, more calculating. First contact at 6:32. She initiated with a look. I approached with a standard opener about the weather. She responded immediately, invited me to sit down. No hesitation, no awkwardness. This woman has done this before. Page 3 contained a transcript of their initial conversation. I read Margot's words in her voice, hearing the flirtation and practiced charm she'd once used on me. Margot: "I don't usually see new faces in here. Just passing through?" Garrus: "Something like that. You seem to know the place well." Margot: "I'm a regular. Thursday nights are my time to unwind, get away from the usual routine." Garrus: "Husband doesn't mind you unwinding alone?" Margot: "What he doesn't know won't hurt him. Besides, a girl needs her secrets." I had to stop reading. The casual dismissal of our marriage, the practiced way she'd deflected questions about me, the implication that she'd been doing this regularly. It was worse than I'd imagined. "There's more," Garrus said gently. The conversation continued for about 2 hours. She told me she worked in HR, mentioned being married but described it as comfortable but boring. Said her husband was a carpenter who spent more time with wood than with her. I build custom furniture, I said. It's not the same thing. She also mentioned that Thursday nights were her freedom nights, quote unquote. Said she'd been coming to the Lantern for about 6 months, had met interesting people there before. 6 months. I flipped through more pages, seeing photos of Margot becoming progressively more animated, more tactile. Her hand on Garrus's arm, leaning in to whisper something in his ear. The body language of a woman who was definitely not discussing literature. At 9:15, she suggested moving somewhere more private, Garrus continued. Said she knew a place nearby. When we got to the Riverside Hotel, she produced a key card from her purse, not a room key, a frequent guest card. The desk clerk greeted her by name. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. Margot had been systematically betraying our marriage for months, with planning and premeditation that suggested she'd done this before, probably multiple times. How many times? I asked. Based on what the desk clerk let slip, she's been there at least a dozen times in the past few months. Always Thursday nights, usually with different men. She's got a system. The folder contained photos from the hotel lobby, time-stamped and dated. Margot walking confidently toward the elevators, her arm linked through Garrus's. She looked happy, excited, alive in a way I hadn't seen her look at home in years. What happened upstairs? I got what you needed and left. Audio recording of her making it clear this was a regular thing for her, that her husband, you, had no idea, and that she had no intention of stopping. She propositioned me for next Thursday before I made an excuse and got out of there. The final pages contained a background report Garrus had compiled. Credit card records showing regular charges at the Lantern going back 8 months. Hotel loyalty program activity. Even social media posts that, when viewed in context, took on new meaning. Cryptic references to girls' night out and time for myself that I'd assumed were about her book club. There's one more thing, Garrus said, his voice careful. She mentioned having a friend who covers for her. Someone named Lisa, who knows about the Thursday nights and helps maintain the book club story. Lisa. Margot's supposed best friend, who I'd thought was simply unreliable when she contradicted Margot's stories about their meetings. Instead, she was an active accomplice in my wife's betrayal. I closed the folder and sat back in my chair, feeling like I'd been hollowed out from the inside. 8 years of marriage, reduced to a manila folder full of evidence that the woman I'd loved and trusted had been systematically lying to me for months. What happens now is up to you, Garrus said. Some guys take this to a lawyer and file for divorce. Others try counseling, see if the marriage can be salvaged. Some just pretend they never found out and hope it stops on its own. And some decide to level the playing field. I thought about Margot's smile this morning, her casual humming, the way she'd kissed my forehead while the taste of another man was probably still on her lips. I thought about Lisa, helping to maintain the lie. I thought about months of Thursday nights, of book club meetings that were actually planned infidelity sessions. What would leveling the playing field look like? Garrus leaned back in his chair. Hypothetically, you've got documentation of everything. Audio, video, timestamps, witnesses. Your wife thinks she's been clever, but she's actually been sloppy. Creatures of habit usually are. If someone wanted to turn the tables, make her face some consequences for her choices. He shrugged. There are ways to do that without breaking any laws. I picked up the folder, surprised by how heavy it felt. I need to think about this. Take your time. But Cal, whatever you decide to do, don't let her know you know. Not yet. Right now, you have the advantage of information. Once she knows you know, that advantage disappears. I drove home through streets that looked exactly the same as they had that morning, but felt completely different. My house, my marriage, my entire life had been revealed as something other than what I'd believed it to be. The question now was what I intended to do about it. Margot's car was in the driveway when I arrived. She was in the kitchen, making herself a sandwich and talking on the phone. "I know, right?" she was saying. "It was so good last night. I can't wait for next week." She looked up as I entered, smiled, and mouthed Lisa while pointing at her phone. Lisa, the accomplice, the friend who helped maintain the lie. "Hey, I have to go," Margot said into the phone. "Cal just got home. See you soon." She hung up and turned to me with that bright, practiced smile. "How was your morning, honey?" "Productive," I said, setting the folder down on the counter between us. "Very productive." She glanced at the folder, her expression curious but not concerned. "What's that?" "Just some paperwork. Nothing important." I watched her face, looking for tells, for signs of guilt or nervousness. But Margot had gotten good at hiding her emotions. She just nodded and took a bite of her sandwich. "Lisa says hi, by the way. She was just telling me about book club last night. Apparently I missed some really good discussion after I left early." Another lie, delivered with casual confidence. I nodded and smiled back. "That's too bad. Maybe you can catch up with her this weekend." "Maybe. Oh, that reminds me. I might be a little late tonight. Work thing, you know how it is." It was Friday. Her pattern was Thursdays, but apparently she was expanding her schedule. "Of course," I said. "I'll probably be in the workshop anyway." She kissed my cheek and headed upstairs, leaving me alone with the folder and a growing sense of cold determination. Margot thought she was playing a game where only she knew the rules. But games were more interesting when both players had all the information. I opened the folder again and began planning my next move. The weekend passed in a strange state of suspended normalcy. Margot and I went through our usual routines: grocery shopping, yard work, dinner with her parents, while I carried the weight of what I now knew. She was charming and attentive, the perfect wife, except for the small details that now stood out like neon signs. The way she checked her phone constantly, smiling at messages she didn't share. The new underwear I found in her laundry, still with tags attached. The fact that she'd started going to the gym 3 times a week after years of claiming she was too busy for exercise. Sunday evening, she announced her plans for the week. Book club Thursday, of course, and I might need to work late a couple of nights. We're launching a new employee wellness program, and the timeline is aggressive. "Sounds stressful," I said. "It is, but it's also exciting. Sometimes you need to shake things up, you know? Break out of the routine." The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a saw, but I just nodded and smiled. "I'm proud of you for taking on new challenges." She beamed at me, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. She had no idea that her carefully constructed double life was about to collapse. Monday morning, I called in a favor from my cousin Brady, who worked as a bouncer at a club downtown and had the kind of flexible schedule that came with night work. Brady was 2 years younger than me, built like a linebacker, and had never liked Margot much, though he'd been polite enough to keep his opinions to himself. "I need your help with something," I told him over coffee at a diner near the waterfront. "What kind of help?" I slid a photo across the table, one of Margot at the lantern, looking comfortable and confident. "The kind where my wife thinks she's smarter than she actually is." Brady studied the photo, his expression darkening. "She's cheating. Has been for months. Systematic, planned, ongoing. She's got a whole system worked out." "What do you need?" "Backup, moral support, maybe some muscle if things get complicated. I'm not planning anything illegal, but I want to make sure she faces some consequences for her choices." Brady had been through his own relationship disasters and understood the particular kind of betrayal that came with systematic deception. "What's the plan?" "First, I'm going to let her know that I know, but not directly. I want her to figure it out gradually, the same way I did. Let her experience some of the paranoia and uncertainty she's been putting me through. And then we see how she reacts. If she comes clean and shows some remorse, maybe we try to work things out. If she doubles down on the lies, I shrugged. Then we get creative. Brady grinned, the first genuine smile I'd seen in days. I'm in. When do we start? The plan began Tuesday evening. Margot had texted that she'd be working late, which I now understood meant she was expanding her infidelity schedule beyond Thursdays. Instead of spending the evening in my workshop, I decided to take a drive downtown. The Lantern was exactly what I'd expected from Garris's description. A dimly lit dive bar with sticky floors and the kind of clientele that came for anonymity rather than ambiance. I took a corner table with a clear view of the entrance and waited. Margot arrived at 7:30, wearing a dress I'd never seen before and carrying herself with the confident stride of someone who owned the room. She took the same table she'd occupied in Garris's photos, ordered the same dirty martini, and began the same routine of checking her phone while scanning the room for prospects. I watched her for an hour, nursing a beer and taking careful note of her behavior. She was approached by 3 different men during that time. The first 2 were dismissed quickly. Too young, too drunk, not meeting whatever criteria she'd established. The third was more successful, a guy in an expensive suit who looked like he spent serious money on his haircut. They talked for 30 minutes before leaving together. I followed at a distance, confirming what I already knew. They were heading to the Riverside Hotel. I drove home and was waiting in the living room when Margot returned at 11:45. "How was work?" I asked. She started slightly, then recovered with that practiced smile. "Long. Exhausting. The wellness program is turning out to be more complicated than we thought." "I'm sure it is. Did you grab dinner?" "Just something quick at the office." She kissed my cheek, and I caught the faint scent of cologne that definitely wasn't mine. "I'm going to shower and head to bed. This week is going to be brutal." I waited until I heard the water running upstairs, then sent her a text from my phone. "Hope your meeting went well tonight. The Lantern seems like an interesting place for business dinners." The water stopped running immediately. Wednesday morning, Margot was quieter than usual. She checked her phone obsessively during breakfast and kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Nervous? Suspicious? Guilty? Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine. Just tired. This project is really demanding." "Maybe you should take a break. Skip book club tomorrow, get some rest." "No," she said quickly. "I can't miss book club. The group is depending on me." After she left for work, I called Garris. "I need another favor." "What kind of favor?" "The kind where my wife gets a little preview of what it feels like to be watched." "Cal, if you're thinking about confronting her," "Not confronting, just evening the playing field. She's been playing games for months. I think it's time she knew someone else was playing too." There was a long pause. "What do you have in mind?" "Can you be at the Lantern tomorrow night? Not as bait this time, just as an observer. I want her to see you, recognize you, and start wondering what you're doing there." "That's actually pretty clever. Let her paranoia do the work for you." "Exactly. She thinks she's been careful, but she's about to learn that her secrets aren't as secret as she believed." Thursday arrived gray and drizzling again, as if the weather was stuck in a loop that matched my mood. Margot was jumpy all day, calling me twice to ask random questions about my plans for the evening and whether I was expecting any visitors. "Just another quiet night in the workshop," I told her. "You have fun at book club." She left the house at 6:30, dressed for seduction rather than literary discussion. I gave her a 15-minute head start, then drove downtown to meet Brady at a coffee shop across from the Lantern. "She's inside," Brady reported. "Been there about 10 minutes, same table as before." "And Garris. Corner of the bar, perfect position to be seen without being obvious about it." We waited. At 7:15, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "She just spotted me. Looks like she's seen a ghost." Through the window, I could see Margot's silhouette at her usual table. Her posture had changed. Instead of relaxed confidence, she was sitting rigid, her head turning frequently to scan the room. She's rattled, Brady observed. Keep watching. Margot's evening routine fell apart quickly. Instead of her usual patient wait for the right prospect, she was checking her phone constantly, looking over her shoulder and declining approaches from potential companions. At 8:30, she abruptly stood up, threw money on the table, and headed for the exit. She's running, Brady said. Good. Let her run. Let her wonder why the private investigator who documented her last betrayal is sitting in her favorite hunting ground. Margot's car pulled out of the parking lot with the kind of speed that suggested panic. I followed at a distance, curious to see where she'd go when her carefully planned evening fell apart. She didn't go home. Instead, she drove to Lisa's apartment complex across town and sat in her car for 20 minutes, apparently making phone calls. When she finally went inside, I could see lights come on in Lisa's second-floor apartment and shadows moving behind the curtains. Emergency meeting with her accomplice, trying to figure out how much trouble she was in and what her next move should be. I drove home and settled in to wait. This time, I wasn't hiding in my workshop. I was sitting in the living room with a book and a cup of coffee, making it clear that I was awake and alert when she returned. Margot came through the front door at 10:45, 2 hours earlier than her usual Thursday night schedule. She looked pale and shaken, her confidence replaced by something that looked suspiciously like fear. You're home early, I said, without looking up from my book. Book club was canceled. Lisa wasn't feeling well. That's too bad. Maybe next week. She nodded and started toward the stairs, then stopped. Cal? Have you noticed anything strange lately? Anyone watching the house or following you around? I looked up, meeting her eyes with what I hoped was an expression of innocent concern. No, why? Should I be worried about something? Probably not. I thought I saw someone I recognized tonight. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Where? At Lisa's building. Someone from work. It was probably nothing. Another lie. But this one was different. Defensive rather than offensive. She was scared, and she was fishing for information. Well, if you're worried about it, maybe you should mention it to the police. No, I'm sure it's nothing. Just my imagination. She kissed my forehead and headed upstairs, but I could hear her pacing in our bedroom for the next hour, occasionally talking in low, urgent tones on her phone. The game had changed. For months, Margot had held all the cards, confident in her ability to deceive and manipulate. Now she was starting to realize that someone else might be playing too, and she didn't know the rules. I finished my book and went to bed, where I slept better than I had in weeks. Tomorrow, the real fun would begin. Friday morning brought the first crack in Margot's facade. I found her in the kitchen at 5:30 a.m., still in her robe, staring at her phone with the hollow-eyed intensity of someone who'd been awake most of the night. Couldn't sleep? I asked, starting the coffee maker. She jumped, nearly dropping her phone. Oh, Cal, I didn't hear you come down. Bad dreams? Something like that. She attempted her usual bright smile, but it flickered and died like a candle in the wind. I keep thinking about that person I saw last night. It's bothering me more than it should. Want to talk about it? For a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. Her mouth opened, and I could see her weighing her options, calculating risks and benefits. Then the moment passed, and the mask slipped back into place. It's nothing, just work stress making me paranoid. I poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. You know, if work is getting to you this much, maybe you should take some time off. We could go away for a weekend, reconnect, spend some quality time together. The suggestion hit her like a physical blow. The idea of being trapped with me for an entire weekend, unable to pursue her Thursday night activities or meet with her accomplices, clearly terrified her. I can't. Not right now. This wellness program launch is too important. Of course it is. She left for work earlier than usual, claiming she needed to get a head start on a difficult day. I watched from the window as she sat in her car for several minutes before starting the engine, talking on her phone with animated gestures that suggested she was either very angry or very scared. Probably both. I spent the morning in my workshop, putting finishing touches on a dining room table I'd been crafting for a client. The repetitive motion of sanding and the smell of wood stain usually calmed me, but today I was too keyed up to focus properly. Instead, I found myself planning the next phase of Margot's education. At noon, I drove downtown to meet Garrus at his office. "She's spooked," he reported. "Spent most of last night calling someone, probably this Lisa person you mentioned. My contact at the hotel says she canceled a standing reservation. She's changing her pattern. Smart move, if she'd done it 6 months ago, but it's too late now. She's already left too many tracks, and she knows it." I leaned back in my chair, considering my options. What would you do in my position? Honestly, take the evidence to a lawyer and file for divorce. Clean break, favorable settlement, move on with your life. What you're doing now, it's risky. You're playing with someone who's already proven she's willing to lie and manipulate to get what she wants. But I understand the appeal. She's been making you look like a fool for months. There's something satisfying about returning the favor. What's the worst that could happen? Garrus was quiet for a long moment. She could figure out what you're doing and turn it around on you. Make you look like the bad guy, the controlling husband who hired a private investigator to spy on his innocent wife. Or she could escalate, start playing dirtier than you're prepared for. And the best case? She breaks down, confesses everything, and begs for forgiveness. You get to decide whether she deserves it. I thought about Margot's face that morning, the fear and uncertainty that had replaced her usual confidence. I want to give her one more chance to come clean on her own. How? Dinner tonight. Just the two of us. I'll create an opening for her to tell me the truth about what's been going on. If she takes it, I shrugged. Maybe we can work something out. And if she doesn't, then we move to phase 2. That evening, I made reservations at Margot's favorite restaurant, a small Italian place where we'd had our first anniversary dinner. When she came home from work, I was waiting with flowers and a bottle of wine. "What's all this?" she asked, but her smile looked more nervous than pleased. "I thought we could use a night out, just the two of us. It feels like we haven't really talked in months." She accepted the flowers with the enthusiasm of someone being handed a subpoena, but she agreed to dinner. We drove to the restaurant in relative silence, the weight of unspoken secrets filling the space between us. Over appetizers, I kept the conversation light: work, weekend plans, a vacation we'd been discussing for next summer. Margot participated, but I could see her checking her phone every few minutes, distracted by concerns I wasn't supposed to know about. "You seem stressed lately," I said as our entrees arrived. "More than usual. Is everything okay?" "Fine. Just busy." "It's more than that, though, isn't it? You've been different these past few months, distant, like your mind is somewhere else." She set down her fork and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What are you trying to say, Cal?" "I'm saying that if something's wrong, if there's something you need to tell me, this would be a good time to do it." The opening was there, clear and unmistakable. A chance for her to come clean, to salvage what was left of our marriage with honesty instead of continuing the charade. I watched her face, looking for signs that she was going to take it. Instead, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Cal, honey, I think you're reading too much into things. I've been working hard, yes, but that doesn't mean anything's wrong between us. I love you. You know that, right?" The lie was delivered with such practiced sincerity that I almost believed it myself. Almost. "Of course I know that," I said. "I love you too." We finished dinner making small talk about nothing important. Margot seemed to relax as the evening progressed, probably interpreting my probing questions as general marital anxiety rather than specific suspicion. By the time we got home, she was almost back to her normal self. Thank you for tonight, she said, kissing me in the hallway. I needed that. Sometimes I forget how good we are together. We are good together, I agreed, when we're honest with each other. She looked at me sharply, but I was already heading toward the stairs. I'm going to take a shower and get some work done in the workshop. Don't wait up. I spent 2 hours in the basement, not working on furniture but planning the next phase of Margot's education. She'd had her chance to come clean, and she'd chosen to double down on the lies instead. That told me everything I needed to know about her priorities and her character. It was time to stop playing defense. Saturday morning, I called Brady. Ready for phase 2? What do you need? Research. I want to know everything about this Lisa person. Where she works, where she hangs out, what her vulnerabilities are. If she's helping Margot maintain this charade, she needs to face some consequences too. Consider it done. What about Margot? Margot's going to learn what it feels like when the people you trust start keeping secrets. Lisa Chen worked as a marketing coordinator for a boutique advertising agency downtown. She was single, lived alone, and according to Brady's research, had a reputation for being involved in other people's drama. She was also, apparently, a regular at several bars in the area. Not just the Lantern, but a whole circuit of places where married people went to pretend they were single. On Sunday afternoon, I paid Lisa a visit. Her apartment complex was one of those modern places with a lot of glass and steel, designed to look expensive while being cheaply constructed. I found her apartment number and knocked on the door, carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing my most charming smile. Lisa, I'm Cal, Margot's husband. I hope you don't mind me dropping by. She opened the door with the cautious expression of someone who wasn't sure whether she was in trouble. Cal, hi. Margot's not here. I know. I was actually hoping to talk to you about Margot. The caution in her expression shifted to alarm. What about her? May I come in? It's kind of a personal matter. She hesitated, probably calculating how much danger she was in, then stepped aside to let me enter. Her apartment was decorated in the kind of aggressive femininity that suggested she was trying to prove something to someone. These are for you, I said, handing her the flowers. A thank you gift. Thank you for what? For being such a good friend to Margot. She tells me you've been covering for her book club meetings, making sure she has time to pursue her literary interests. Lisa's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Of course you do. The Thursday night meetings at the Lantern, the hotel arrangements, the whole elaborate system you've helped her set up. I sat down on her couch without being invited, making myself comfortable. It's actually quite impressive from an organizational standpoint. I think you should leave. I think we should have a conversation. See, Lisa, I know about Margot's extracurricular activities. I have detailed documentation of her Thursday night adventures, including audio recordings of her describing how helpful you've been in maintaining her cover story. That wasn't entirely true. Garris's recordings had mentioned Lisa, but not in detail. But Lisa didn't know that. She sank into a chair across from me, looking like she was about to be sick. What do you want? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. Margot's been lying to me for months, and you've been helping her do it. That makes you complicit in the destruction of my marriage. She said you two were having problems, that you were growing apart. Did she also mention that we've never discussed divorce? That as far as I knew, we were working through a rough patch like every married couple does? Lisa's silence was answer enough. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to stop enabling Margot's behavior. No more cover stories, no more alibi assistance, no more playing along with her book club fantasy. If she asks for your help maintaining her lies, you're going to decline. And if I don't? Then I start making phone calls. To your boss, to your friends, to anyone who might be interested in knowing that Lisa Chen makes a hobby of helping married women cheat on their husbands. How do you think that's going to affect your social life? Your professional reputation? It was a bluff, mostly. I had no intention of actually destroying Lisa's life over this, But she didn't know that, and the threat was effective enough to get her attention. You can't prove I did anything wrong. I don't have to prove it. I just have to suggest it. People love gossip, especially when it involves betrayal and infidelity. Once the rumors start, they take on a life of their own. Lisa stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to decide if I was serious. You're not the man Margot described. No, I'm not. Margot's been telling you stories about her boring, inattentive husband who doesn't appreciate her. The truth is, I've been completely devoted to her for 8 years, and she's been repaying that devotion with systematic betrayal. She said whatever she needed to say to get your help, just like she's been saying whatever she needed to say to get mine. The difference is, I found out what she's really been doing. I stood up, smoothing down my jacket. Think about what I've said, Lisa. You've got a choice to make. You can keep helping Margot destroy my marriage, or you can step back and let her face the consequences of her own choices. What are you going to do to her? Nothing she doesn't deserve. But that's between Margot and me. Your only concern should be deciding which side of this you want to be on when everything comes out. I left Lisa sitting in her apartment, staring at the flowers I'd brought her, and probably wondering how her life had gotten so complicated so quickly. The drive home gave me time to think about what I'd just done. Threatening Lisa wasn't something I'd planned, but it felt necessary. Margot's support system needed to crumble before she would face the reality of her situation. When I got home, Margot was in the kitchen, preparing dinner and humming that tune I'd grown to hate. She looked up as I entered, smiling with what appeared to be genuine warmth. There you are. I was starting to worry. Just running some errands. How was your day? Quiet, relaxing. I spent most of it thinking about last night, about how nice it was to have dinner together. We should do that more often. We should, I agreed. Maybe we can make it a regular thing. Thursday nights, just the two of us. The suggestion hit its mark. Margot's smile faltered and she turned back to the stove with studied casualness. Thursdays are tricky with book club. Right, book club. How could I forget? My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it, then smiled. Everything okay? Margot asked. Perfect, I said. Everything's working out exactly as planned. The text was from Lisa. We need to talk. Call me. Phase 2 was officially underway. Monday morning arrived with the kind of bitter cold that made October in Maine feel like a warning shot from winter. I woke to find Margot already up, sitting at the kitchen table with her phone pressed to her ear and an expression of barely controlled panic on her face. I don't care what he said, she was whispering into the phone. You can't just abandon me now. We had an agreement. She noticed me in the doorway and quickly ended the call. Morning, honey. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. Everything okay? You sounded upset. Just work drama. You know how it is. But I could see the cracks spreading. Her hands were shaking as she poured coffee, and she kept glancing at her phone like she was expecting bad news. The call had been to Lisa, obviously. My visit yesterday had achieved its intended effect. Margot's primary accomplice was getting cold feet, and the carefully constructed support system for her double life was beginning to crumble. I was thinking, I said, settling at the table with my own coffee. Maybe we should have Lisa over for dinner sometime. It's been ages since I've seen her. Margot's coffee cup rattled against the saucer. Lisa's been really busy lately. New boyfriend, I think. She's not very social right now. That's too bad. I always liked Lisa. She seems so reliable. The word hit like a physical blow. Margot's face went pale, and she excused herself to get ready for work, claiming she had an early meeting. After she left, my phone rang. Lisa, as expected. We need to talk, she said without preamble. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you meet me for lunch? Of course, where? Somewhere public. Somewhere safe. She was scared, which meant my message had been received and understood. We agreed to meet at a busy deli downtown, the kind of place where serious conversations could be hidden in plain sight. Lisa was already there when I arrived, occupying a corner table and looking like she hadn't slept much. She'd ordered coffee but hadn't touched it, and she kept glancing toward the door like she was expecting trouble. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "Thank you for calling. I want you to know that I never meant for things to go this far. When Margot first asked me to cover for her, she made it sound like a one-time thing, a moment of weakness she needed to work through. But it wasn't a one-time thing. No, it kept happening. Every Thursday, sometimes other nights too. And the stories kept changing. First, she was just having drinks with friends. Then, she was meeting potential business contacts. Then, it was about finding herself, exploring her options. Exploring her options? Lisa looked uncomfortable. She said she wasn't sure if she wanted to stay married, that she needed to see what else was out there before she made any permanent decisions. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. While I'd been working on our marriage, trying to be a better husband, Margot had been shopping for my replacement. How long has this been going on? 8 months, maybe longer. She started small, just asking me to back up stories about girls' nights out or shopping trips. But it escalated. She wanted me to lie to you directly, to call the house and ask for her when I knew she was with someone else. And you did it. At first. But it made me uncomfortable. And then... She paused, struggling with something. Then I realized she was lying to me too. About what? About you. She told me you were emotionally distant, that you ignored her, that you were probably cheating yourself. She made it sound like she was just evening the score. But that wasn't true. No. I could tell from the way she talked about you, the way her stories kept changing. And yesterday, when you came to my apartment, she shook her head. You're nothing like the man she described. I leaned back in my chair, processing this new information. Margot hadn't just been betraying me. She'd been systematically destroying my reputation with her friends, creating a narrative that justified her behavior and enlisted others as accomplices. What do you want from me, Lisa? I want out. I want to stop being part of this mess. But I'm scared of what Margot might do if I abandon her now. What could she do? She knows things about me, mistakes I've made, people I've been involved with. She's good at collecting information about people, using it to keep them loyal. Blackmail. Of course. Margot's HR training had taught her how to manage people, and she'd been applying those skills to her personal life. What kind of mistakes? Lisa was quiet for a long moment. I had an affair with my boss last year. He's married, has kids. Margot found out and helped me keep it quiet, but she never let me forget that she knew. She's been holding it over you. Not directly, but the implication was always there. Help me, and I'll help you. Stop helping me, and... She shrugged. I felt a surge of anger that surprised me with its intensity. It was one thing for Margot to betray me. That was personal, between us. But manipulating and controlling other people, turning them into unwilling accomplices in her deception, was something else entirely. Here's what we're going to do, I said. You're going to tell Margot that you can't help her anymore, that you're worried about getting caught and you need to step back. She'll be furious. Let her be furious. If she threatens you or tries to use what she knows against you, you call me immediately. I have enough evidence of her activities to make her think twice about starting a war she can't win. What about you? What are you going to do? I'm going to give my wife a choice. She can come clean about everything she's been doing, or she can face the consequences of her actions. Lisa nodded slowly. She's not going to like that. I'm counting on it. That evening, I waited for Margot to come home from work, curious to see how Lisa's defection would affect her demeanor. She arrived later than usual, looking frazzled and angry. Bad day? I asked. Terrible day. People are being completely unreasonable about everything. Want to talk about it? No, I just want to take a bath and go to bed." But instead of heading upstairs, she poured herself a large glass of wine and began pacing around the kitchen, occasionally muttering under her breath. I caught fragments. "Ungrateful. After everything I've done, can't trust anyone. Margot, are you sure you're okay?" She stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, raw frustration mixed with something that looked like desperation. "Do you ever feel like the people closest to you are keeping secrets?" she asked. The question was so loaded with irony that I had to bite back a laugh. "Sometimes. Why?" I feel like I can't trust anyone anymore. Like everyone's got their own agenda." That sounds paranoid. Does it? Or does it sound realistic? She took a long sip of wine. "People lie, Cal. They tell you what you want to hear while they're planning to stab you in the back. Is there something specific you want to tell me?" For a moment, I thought she might actually do it. Confess everything, clear the air, give us a chance to work through this mess together. But then her phone buzzed with a text message, and whatever moment of vulnerability she'd been experiencing vanished. "It's nothing," she said, checking her phone. "Just work stress making me paranoid." She headed upstairs, leaving me alone with the distinct impression that Margot's world was starting to fall apart. Lisa's defection had clearly shaken her, but she wasn't ready to admit defeat yet. The next morning brought confirmation that the pressure was having its intended effect. I found Margot in the bathroom at 6 a.m., throwing up with the kind of violence that suggested stress rather than illness. "Food poisoning?" I asked, offering her a damp washcloth. "Must be." But her hands were shaking, and she couldn't meet my eyes. She called in sick to work, the first time I could remember her taking an unscheduled day off in years. Instead of staying in bed, though, she spent the morning making phone calls, her voice rising and falling with frustration as whoever she was calling apparently refused to cooperate. At noon, she announced she was going out for a drive to clear her head. She was gone for 3 hours, and when she returned, she looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before. "Feel better?" I asked. "Not really." She slumped onto the couch beside me, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd seen her in years. "Cal, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If you found out I'd made some mistakes, serious mistakes, would you be able to forgive me?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility. This was it, the opening I'd been waiting for, the chance for her to come clean and give us both a shot at salvaging something from the wreckage of our marriage. "That would depend on the mistakes," I said carefully, "and whether you were genuinely sorry for making them. What if the mistakes were really bad? What if they were the kind of thing that could destroy everything we've built together? Margot, what are you trying to tell me?" She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her options, calculating risks and benefits. Then her phone rang, and the moment shattered. "I have to take this," she said, glancing at the caller ID. She stepped into the kitchen to answer, but I could hear her side of the conversation. "No, I can't do that, because it's too risky. I don't care what you think, I'm not ready. Give me more time." When she returned to the living room, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by a hardness I was becoming familiar with. "Sorry about that. Work emergency." "On a sick day?" "You know how it is. The job never really stops." But I could see the calculation in her eyes. Whatever chance she'd been considering, whatever confession she'd been contemplating, had been abandoned. She was choosing to double down on the lies, to keep fighting rather than surrender. That night, as Margot slept fitfully beside me, I made my own decision. I'd given her multiple opportunities to come clean, to show some remorse, to take responsibility for her actions. She'd rejected them all. It was time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made everything seem sharper, more defined. I woke before dawn and spent an hour in my workshop, not building anything but simply thinking through the final phase of what had become less a plan than an inevitability. Margot was already in the kitchen when I came upstairs, dressed for work, but moving with the nervous energy of someone who was trying very hard to appear normal. "Big day today?" I asked, pouring coffee. "Just the usual. Although," she paused, touching her earring, the tell I'd learned to recognize months ago. "Book club might be canceled tonight. Lisa's still not feeling well." "That's too bad. Maybe you could use a quiet night at home instead." Maybe. But I could see her mind working, already calculating alternatives. The Thursday night pattern was too ingrained to abandon easily, and Lisa's defection had left her scrambling to maintain her routine. After she left for work, I made a series of phone calls. First to Brady, confirming our plans for the evening. Then to Garris, arranging for backup documentation. Finally, to a number I'd memorized but never called, Derek Lane, Margot's most recent conquest. "Derek, this is Cal Grady, Margot's husband. I think it's time we had a conversation." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Then, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. Thursday nights at the Lantern, the Riverside Hotel, my wife's standing reservation. Ring any bells?" "Look, man, I don't want any trouble." "Neither do I. That's why we're going to meet and discuss this like civilized adults. 1 o'clock, grind coffee downtown. Don't make me come looking for you." Derek was already there when I arrived, occupying a corner table and looking like he was considering making a run for it. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of gym-sculpted physique and expensive haircut that suggested he spent considerable time and money on his appearance. "You came," I said, sitting down across from him. "What do you want?" "I want to understand what you think you're doing with my wife." Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Look, she told me she was getting divorced. Said you two were separated and just working out the details. Did she also tell you she's been doing this for months? That you're just the latest in a long line of Thursday night adventures?" The color drained from his face. "That's not—" "She said I was special." "I'm sure she did. Margot's very good at making people feel special. It's part of her professional training." I slid a photo across the table. One of Garris's surveillance shots showing Margot with a different man, taken weeks before she'd met Derek. "This was her Thursday night companion before you. There have been others. You're not special, Derek. You're convenient." Derek stared at the photo, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and humiliation. "She played me. She played both of us. The difference is I'm her husband. You're just collateral damage." "What do you want from me?" "I want you to disappear. Stop taking her calls. Stop meeting her for drinks. Stop being available for her Thursday night entertainment. Find someone who's actually single and interested in a real relationship." "And if I don't?" I leaned forward, keeping my voice low and level. "Then I start making your life complicated. Phone calls to your employer, your friends, your family. Social media posts with your picture, and a detailed explanation of your hobby of pursuing married women. How do you think that's going to affect your dating prospects?" Derek was quiet for a long moment, probably weighing his options. Finally, "She's really married? Like, actually married, not separated?" 8 years next month. Living in the same house, sharing the same bed, filing joint tax returns. As married as it gets." Jesus. He ran his hands through his carefully styled hair. "I feel like an idiot." "You should. But you can stop being an idiot right now by walking away." "What about Margot? What are you going to do to her?" "That's between Margot and me. Your only concern should be making sure you're not part of whatever happens next." Derek nodded slowly, then stood up from the table. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I really thought she was telling the truth. She's very convincing. That's what makes her dangerous." After Derek left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, watching people go about their normal lives and thinking about how quickly everything could change. This morning, Margot had believed she was in control of her situation. By tonight, she would discover just how wrong she'd been. At 5 p.m., I was waiting in my workshop when Brady arrived, carrying a duffel bag and wearing the kind of grin that suggested he was looking forward to the evening's activities. "Everything ready?" he asked. "Everything's ready. Garrus is in position at the lantern. Derek's been neutralized. Lisa's out of the picture. Margot's going to walk into that bar tonight expecting business as usual and find out that her entire world has collapsed. And then? Then we see what she's really made of." Margot came home at 6:30, later than usual and clearly agitated. She went through the motions of her Thursday night routine: shower, careful makeup application, outfit selection, but I could see the tension in her movements. "Book club back on?" I asked as she headed for the door. "Lisa's feeling better. We're going to try to salvage the evening." "Have fun. Don't do anything I wouldn't do." She paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. For a moment I thought she might say something. Confess, apologize, ask for help. Instead, she just nodded and left. Brady and I gave her a 15-minute head start, then drove downtown to begin the final phase of Margot's education. The lantern looked exactly the same as it had during my previous surveillance visits. Dim lighting, sticky floors, and the kind of clientele that valued anonymity over ambiance. Margot was at her usual table, but instead of her typical confident demeanor, she looked nervous and uncertain. "She's been here for 20 minutes, Garrus reported via text. "Keeps checking her phone and looking toward the door. I don't think her date is coming." Derek, as promised, was nowhere to be seen. Margot's Thursday night routine was falling apart, and she was beginning to realize it. At 8 p.m., she finally gave up waiting and moved to the bar, ordering what looked like a double martini and scanning the room for alternative prospects. But the lantern was unusually quiet for a Thursday night, and the few men who approached her were quickly dismissed. "She's getting desperate," Brady observed from our position across the street. "Look at her body language." He was right. Margot's usual patience and selectivity had been replaced by increasingly obvious signs of frustration. She was drinking faster than usual, checking her phone constantly, and accepting conversations with men she would normally have ignored. At 9:30, she finally found someone willing to play along, a guy in his 50s who looked like he'd been drinking since happy hour. They talked for about 20 minutes before heading toward the exit together. "Time to go," I told Brady. We followed them to the Riverside Hotel, where Margot's usual confident stride faltered as she approached the front desk. I couldn't hear the conversation from our position in the lobby, but I could see the desk clerk shaking his head and Margot's expression growing increasingly agitated. "Excuse me," I said, approaching the desk. "Is there a problem?" The clerk looked uncomfortable. "The lady's reservation seems to have been canceled." "Canceled? By whom?" "I'm not authorized to discuss the details, but there was some kind of issue with the payment method on file. I'd called the hotel that afternoon and had Margot's frequent guest account suspended, citing suspicious activity on the credit card associated with it. It was a small thing, but I'd known it would be devastating to someone who'd built her entire system around predictability and control." Margot turned toward me, and for a moment, she didn't recognize me. When she did, the color drained from her face. "Cal, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question. Interesting place for a book club meeting." Her companion, sensing trouble, mumbled an excuse and disappeared toward the bar. Margot was left standing alone in the hotel lobby, her carefully constructed evening in ruins. "We need to talk," I said. "Not here." "Yes, here. Right now, because I'm tired of pretending I don't know what you've been doing." The words hung in the air between us, and I watched as the last of Margot's illusions crumbled. She knew that I knew. The game was over. "How long?" she asked quietly. Long enough. The question is, what are you going to do about it? She looked around the lobby, taking in the curious stares of other guests, the uncomfortable expression of the desk clerk, the complete collapse of her secret life. Can we go home, please? I'll tell you everything. It was the first completely honest thing she'd said to me in months. Yes, I said. We can go home. The drive back to our house passed in silence. Margot sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window with the hollow expression of someone whose world had just imploded. I felt no satisfaction in her defeat, only a kind of empty sadness for what we'd lost. At home, we sat in the living room, the same room where we'd had countless conversations about our days, our plans, our future together. Now it felt like a courtroom. Start talking, I said. And finally, after months of lies and deception, Margot began to tell me the truth. The confession took 2 hours. Everything came out. The loneliness she claimed to feel in our marriage, the excitement of meeting new people, the thrill of being desired by strangers. She told me about the system she'd developed, the lies she'd constructed, the people she'd manipulated to maintain her double life. She cried, apologized, begged for forgiveness. She promised to change, to get counseling, to do whatever it took to save our marriage. I listened to it all with the detached interest of someone watching a movie about other people's lives. The woman sitting across from me, sobbing and pleading, felt like a stranger. The Margot I'd married, or thought I'd married, had never existed. When she finished, the house fell quiet, except for the sound of her crying. What happens now? She asked. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months, saw the desperation in her eyes, the fear of consequences, the calculation behind the tears. Even now, in the midst of her confession, she was trying to manage the situation, to find an angle that would minimize the damage to herself. Now, I said, standing up from my chair, you pack a bag and find somewhere else to stay. We'll figure out the rest later. Cal, please, don't do this. We can work through this. No, Margot, we can't, because this isn't something that happened to us. This is something you chose to do repeatedly for months. And the woman who could make those choices isn't someone I want to be married to. She tried to argue, to negotiate, to find some way to change my mind. But I was done listening. Done being manipulated. Done pretending that love could survive the kind of systematic betrayal she'd inflicted on our marriage. By midnight, she was gone, taking only what she could fit in 2 suitcases and leaving behind 8 years of shared history. I stood in our empty house, surrounded by the silence she'd left behind, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The game was over. I'd won. But winning, I discovered, felt a lot like losing.